I'd like to go over Chapter 3, just those slides as an overview of what's being covered in the chapter. Again, this is a reduced version of what the author provided under key concepts. Okay. All right, so in this module, in this chapter, you're going to look at what are called types of organizations. Right, the organization type of the website. This is not whether it's a type of business. It's the hierarchy of that website. What type is it? Is it linear? Is it organizational? Is it web or random? Right, so there are different types of ways we can organize the website and the content in it. Okay, we're going to look at the basic principles of visual design. There are 4 of them at its basic level. Okay. We're going to look at how we determine target audience, or what is target audience and how we can get to it. Navigation, how we improve readability, the graphics, right, and using the appropriate graphics, as well as universal design, page layout options, okay, and techniques, as well as responsive, right, and the concepts of responsive web design. And I have some examples, which I think you'll really enjoy. And how we apply, right, the best practices to web design. So this last bullet here, this is going to be part of your group evaluation, where I provide you a website, I provide you with a group, and you analyze that website based on the best practices. Okay, great. So this here, design for your target audience. As we can see, the 2 samples, this top one and the bottom one, they are definitely going after 2 different types of users or market. While this one, this kayakdoorcounty.net, as you can see, it's got graphics, right? Biggest thing right here, the first thing you see is graphics, outdoor types. While in this one, you'll see that it's mostly text-based, right? So they're really looking for information, textual information, web design and instructional technology resources, while perhaps this group of individuals are looking for more graphic-based, right, interaction with the website. Okay? Because in this case, they're going to be showing where they're kayaking, perhaps, right? And so there will be a lot of more graphical elements than perhaps textual elements. Okay? So 2 different audiences here. How do we get to those audiences? How do we know who our audience is? Research is going to be one of them, right? So what are some of the things I can do to research? Well, one, you're going to look at statistics, okay? General statistics. The others is you're going to look at analytical statistics from websites. So if the site is one that already exists, right, there are some analytics behind the scenes that tell you where these individuals are either coming from, right, either what part of the world they're coming from, what devices they're using to get to your web page, how long they're staying there, what pages they're staying on, most likely, what OS they're using, what browser they're using, what version browser they're using. There is lots of information that we can gather to determine who our target audience is and what should be contained on our website. So eventually it's really research, okay, that's going to help us. All right, web page design, browser compatibility. From the beginning of this course, I've been asking you, use more than one browser. In class, I'd like you to use 3, right? Or at least 2. At home, I would hope that you would install all 5 major browsers. Okay? Because in some cases, not only are we testing it on different browsers, we're testing it on different versions of that browser. Again, depending on who the target audience is. For example, your target perhaps may be the retired group, right? 65 or 67 and older, that is your target audience. So typically that target audience may perhaps have a limited income. They're not going to be buying new computers every couple of years like perhaps you and I might be, right? Perhaps they're not going to be updating their computer as often as we think we should, right? Windows Update does it automatically, okay? So perhaps they have an older computer, an older browser, which means if you're coding and creating this fantastic, elaborate website that's got the most current, right, type of coding and technology on it, well, your users aren't going to benefit because they won't be able to see it, especially if they're on IE6 or IE7 or something like that, right? Yeah. There's still a lot of users on Windows XP, right? So we have to consider these things. Now, what helps us is using something called progressive enhancements. Okay? Progressive enhancements says, let's create our website to the best of our ability with the best technology we can. But keep in mind that if users come to the site that don't have the technology that our site requires, provide them with an alternative, right? So website functions well in browsers commonly used by the target audience. However, right, in this case, it provides them just some other content, right? We downgrade the content or the enhancements to work with their browsers. Okay? So that's what progressive enhancements is. The browser comes to the site looks at, okay, well, this is a more current browser, so great. We're going to add all that good stuff. They're going to be able to see all that cool things we're creating. It comes with a browser that's not current. It then provides them only what it can, but they can still use the site effectively, right, and get the information they need. So that is progressive enhancements. Okay? Based on the user's browser, we provide that content. All right, web page design, screen resolution. Something else we have to consider when we're developing. Right now, the most widely used screen size, right, are these when we refer to a desktop, right? In the mobile space, of course, it's much smaller, okay? But we have to consider this, right? Who are your target audience? If we go back to that example of perhaps the retired age individuals, how many of them are actually using perhaps a smartphone and using it effectively? Will they be using the smartphone to access your page? I don't know, right? Again, the statistics and research are going to help define this. Okay? And so we have to decide whether responsive design is going to be part of our design, in which at this point we should, and it is basically a no-brainer is what we call that, right? That all modern websites should have some form of responsiveness to it. Okay? And so we just have to decide where or how our page would display in whichever resolution, right, is being used. Is it going to be centered? It's going to be stretched across the whole screen, right? Typically, this is going to be our basic, right, layout. It's going to be centered on the page, regardless of the width of that browser, right, or screen. All right, website organization. There are three basic organization types. There is hierarchical, linear, and random. Those are the three. And then there are some subcategories below some of these. So our hierarchical is the one here on the left-hand side, where hierarchy, right, is essentially that term where we have a most important page, which is the home page, and then below the home, we have subcategories, and below them, we may have more categories. Right? So everything is categorized in importance. While the home page is the most important, because that's what users will see at first, the next level of importance, right, of information would then be below the home page. This is not a links map. This is a site map. Okay? It provides a hierarchy, right, of that information that's going to be displayed on the website. The second one is linear. This is very similar to a tutorial or something like an employee code of conduct or an employee manual, where you really want to read it from front to end, right, from the beginning to end. We don't want to jump from spot to spot or category or area to area in that manual. So we'd like to go from the home page to the next page, then to the next page. This is very common in websites that provide articles. How many of you read articles on the web? Yeah, I think all your hands probably go up, right? Now, when you read that article, you get the first page, and then at the bottom, what do you see? An arrow or page number 2, right? it's not often that you see pages 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? Even though it has those pages, you just simply see the next page because they want you to go from one page to the next, right? In order. That's linear. Okay? And then, of course, the lower right-hand corner here is this random, or it's sometimes called web organization. It's that you really can't tell that it even has some sort of organization because there's links and pages all over, and there really is no way to categorize that information, or they haven't categorized it. Okay? So those are the three different types. We, in this class, will most likely be working from this organization type, right? The hierarchical. All right, let's take a look at the 4 visual design principles, at a very basic level. We have repetition, contrast, proximity, and alignment. All of these are displayed in this sample graphic that we have. So while repetition, we're seeing this repeated kind of visual elements throughout the whole design. So in this case, the repeated elements would be, as we move from one page to the next, our graphic at the top, our links at the upper right-hand corner, right? These repetitional elements really are the sizes, of course, of some of these headings, right? The footer, these are repetition areas where every page will have the same content in the same place, right? Contrast, we see it in 2 spots here, a light background, darker text, darker background, lighter text. Right? So we want to make sure it's visibly appealing and attractive and allows us to read it easily. Okay? Proximity, the way we group elements together. Notice that all of these are essentially paragraphs describing each of the areas, while this section are really forms that you have to fill out. So we're grouping things in appropriate areas. Our links are grouped together on the upper right-hand corner. So here's our reservation form. Here's our newsletter form, right? So we now have this proximity or grouping of information. Even these paragraphs, right, are essentially grouped together. And then, of course, alignment, right, of these elements. They're all left aligned in the center. These are all left aligned here. Right? So this is center aligned at the bottom. So essentially, alignment creates this visual, right, unity for the page itself. Again, 4 basic principles. Those of you that are coming from the graphics area can probably expand on these as well, right? But we're just looking for these 4 here in this course. And this will also be part of your project, right, where I'll be grading you for this visual, right, these visual design principles, okay, as part of the underlying theme of the project, of course. Accessibility. We definitely want to include accessibility in all the pages we create. We'll be doing that in this class. So as we move from one chapter to the next, we'll be integrating and including the accessible features and options. Now, there are 2 types of accessibility requirements. One that comes from the government called Section 508. And if you receive funds, right, or have any connection with the government, like we do here at Harper, we receive funds, federal funds from the, or state funds, excuse me, not federal, state funds, from Illinois, because we're a community college. So our website has to abide by the Section 508, right, rules for the web and for our location. We have to have ramps, we have to have elevators, and so on and so forth, right? Now, in this class, we'll be learning the WCAG 2.0 standards. This comes from the W3C, okay? And we're only learning level 1. There are 3 different levels, right? And depending on the guidelines, right, either government or W3C, one's called, I think, level A, the other one's called level 1, 2, and 3, level A, AA, and AAA. Okay, so, and you will be learning these as we move from chapter to chapter. Okay, so very important. We definitely have to include accessibility. The nice thing about it is that simply by following the guidelines provided to you by either of those guidelines, either the government or W3C, you're like 80% or more of the way there for having that page being search engine optimized. So why not, right? Follow the guidelines and you're good to go. Okay? Yeah. All right, writing for the web. Much different than what we do for writing a book, writing papers in our classes, right? This is something, unfortunately, that I believe has hindered us now that we are so attached to the web. We now tend to scan information. We no longer read information. How many of you find that that might be true of the case? Yeah, right? Because that's what we do. We go to the web, we look at something, we scan, we try to see if we can identify the keywords that we're looking for, and if you feel that, yep, those keywords are right, you'll now perhaps read it. But we scan all the time, which then allows us to do that outside of the web, right? When we're reading instruction manuals, when we're reading assignment instructions, all these things, we simply scan it instead of reading it. And that's a sense what's happening now because so many people are doing stuff on the web. But for writing on the web, this is typically what we do. We use or avoid long blocks of text and use short paragraphs. Right? We typically use bullet lists to provide information, and then we use headings and subheadings with proper keyword or key information to give the user what they want, quickly and efficiently. That's really how we write for the web. Let me go back to that. There's actually a whole industry of people that write for the web. You can hire them to write as many pages as you'd like that would be search engine optimized based on your industry. So if I was, let's say, a chicken farmer, right, and I wanted to build a website, but I really don't have the time to write all of the material that is needed for chicken farming and providing information to my users so they can purchase eggs online and so on, well, then I can hire somebody to actually write search engine optimized content for my industry, which is great because really they're not the expert in the industry. They're the expert of search engine optimizing pages. And so they will research it for you and write whatever's necessary to get that page up in the search results, which I think is amazing. So it's a whole other industry that's out there, which is great. So if you are a really good writer, right, and you do editing and things like that, and you may consider that field as something else you might want to dabble into. All right, colors. Yeah, so far our web pages are pretty bland. White background, black text. That's all we have, right? And we didn't even define it. The browser told us those are the colors we're going to use. But now, going forward, we're going to be able to add color, of course. And the way that our computer adds color and displays color is using RGB, red, green, and blue, right? Intensities of those colors, okay? Now, for us, web developers, right, or web designers, we're going to be using hexadecimal values to define the color, okay? So hexadecimal values is a series of 16 different characters. That's why it's called base 16. These 16 characters represent every color in the rainbow, depending on how you put them together. Here is a sample at the bottom here of our hexadecimal values, okay? It starts with F at one end of the spectrum. Okay, so all F's would be considered white. Okay, all zeros, which is at the other side of the spectrum of those 16 characters, that's black. All F's white, all black, all zeros is black. Any numbers in between those 16 characters, you get every color in the rainbow. And they're broken up into three parts. The first two characters is the red. The second two represents the green, and the last two represents the blue in RGB, right? So we're perhaps used to using 0 to 255 for every color, R, G, or B, and that determines the color of intensity and then the color you want to use. Here, we represent, instead of 0 to 255, we use that 16, right, set of characters. It's 0, right, and we go all the way back. So we have A through F, okay, and then 0 to 9. Adding those up should be 16 characters, okay? So A, B, C, D, E, F, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we have a 9, so I must have miscounted somewhere, okay? But Here it is. There's 9. So we go from A to F and 0 to 9. Okay? And that is our 16, base 16 colors. We'll learn more about that in Module 4. All right, use of graphics and multimedia, right? The best practices of. So we have to consider the file size and the dimension. File size, yeah, be careful because we don't want a 30 meg file on there or a 100 meg file. Even though they're streaming, right? It might take a little bit to, right, view that file. Or if we want to download a file, it might take a little while. We really want to keep our file size really small when we talk about graphics, anything we might want to embed. Okay? Graphics, video, sound, keep them as small as possible. And then dimension, of course. Right? That's going to be also a consideration we need to think about going forward. How big on the screen is that going to display? We might want to provide some navigation, of course. You may want to use graphical navigation. You're going to find that most sites today don't use as much graphical navigation as they once did. Everything is basically text-based because, of course, it's easier to create as well as it's better for optimization, right, for websites and accessibility. So all those things come into play now. Okay? Decide or consider the text that you might be using. Make sure you always use alternative text. Again, we haven't really talked about that yet, but this is text that appears when a multimedia or graphic object does not. How many of you have ever encountered that? You go to a web page, the text appears, but the graphics don't. You end up with a box or a graphic, a video that doesn't appear, and you're like, what the heck? Well, if they use alternative text, in that box, you'd probably see some text that says, graphic of or picture of, coastline or something, right? Some descriptive information to let the user know that there should have been something here, but now that it's not, I'm going to let you know what it is or what it should have been. And then, of course, we always want to use multimedia only when it's necessary. We don't want to inundate our pages with graphics and multimedia. Okay? This was very common at one time when Flash was very prominent, that we would make our pages, just crazy with different things moving across the screen and, animated. It's not necessary anymore. And actually, it's not something we want to do. Right? All right. These are navigational considerations. Right? There are places where typically navigation is being placed because we're just so common. We're seeing it in many websites, though our mind automatically assumes that I'm going to be finding navigation at the top going across and perhaps on the left-hand side going down. It's just what our mindset is because so many websites have that. Okay? And they do research on this kind of stuff. So they have research that identifies where users are moving their mouse to. And the majority of users, when asked to look for the navigation, move their mouse to the top of the screen or the left-hand side of the screen. Okay? Similarly, the logo, right? The simple logo. Where do you typically put that logo? Top left. Because why? Most people assume it's going to be there. And if it's not there, they get confused. And they're like, well, wait, where's the logo, right? Yeah. So we put things in places typically, right, where most people assume it will be. Unless, of course, your industry or what you're creating, right, is inherently a creative environment, perhaps something different than the norm. Okay? But that's up to the website and the developer and right the content. All right, so consider these navigation bars. Of course, we're going to be using those. A series of links. Breadcrumb navigation. What the heck is breadcrumb navigation? Who can tell me what that is? Yeah, Cindy. Absolutely. Let me give you a sample. Here is a sample of breadcrumb navigation right there at the top of the Blackboard site. I went to assignments, then I went to the project folder from assignments. That's telling me essentially where I've been, right? Yeah. So breadcrumbs, those little things that are left when we eat, right? They fall on the floor as we're walking across the floor. we can find out where where we've been because we're dropping them. Using graphics for navigation, I kind of talked about that a little bit. We're not seeing that as often, but can be used. It's okay. Dynamic navigation, okay. Dynamic navigation that actually does something. It drops down. It changes colors. It does things for us. Typically, we might be using either CSS now to create drop-down menus or JavaScript to create this really dynamic environment. But just be aware, sometimes using using JavaScript or something other than CSS, okay, may hinder, right, the use of those navigations depending on the user's environment. Because in some corporate environments, they turn off the use of JavaScript in their browsers. Okay? And so now, if your browser or your navigation is based on JavaScript, right, a client-side scripting language, how are users going to navigate? Right? It's no longer available for them. So we have to consider that as something. Sitemaps, right? You might see these as a link that takes you to a page that has all the links on the website. Yeah, that's not really happening too often anymore. Where do you typically see the sitemap or something of what we might call a sitemap? What about the bottom of the page these days, right? The bottom of the page, right, the footer of websites long ago used to be what? Copyright and a couple, maybe one link or something like that, an email address. Now the bottom of the website, the footer is what? Full of these links, right? This is now the modern sitemap. Okay? So that's kind of what we see now. Okay? All right, and then site search features. Again, we're talking about navigation. So instead of perhaps providing a whole mess of links to pages in your website, why not provide just a main set of navigation and then a place for the user to search for more detailed, right, information? The information that they have to click 2, 3, or 4 times to get. Let them search for it and then click once. All right, keep on going. All right, let's talk about wireframes a little bit. You'll have a milestone in your project for creating a wireframe as well as a sitemap. Okay? And so in this case, a wireframe should really contain, right, these basic elements or areas. A logo area, navigational area, a content area, and of course a footer area. So perhaps something like this in its basic format. Now, this is what the book provides as a sample wireframe. I'm going to look for something a little bit more detailed than that. I actually give you an example. So when we get to that milestone, there'll be a PDF that you can look at to see the level of expectation that I have for the sitemap. Again, it's going to be a little bit more detailed than this. Okay? All right. So, a couple items that we might want to consider when designing on our layout. One is the most important information should be above the fold. What does that mean? Yeah, Cindy. Absolutely. That's exactly where that term came from. So the newspaper, anybody remember what that is? Newspaper, right? Okay. Maybe some of you still get it. I don't know. But the newspaper, right, is folded in half. So a full page spread. You open that newspaper and then you open the first page. You got now the full spread. But when it comes to you, right, perhaps thrown out of a window from an early car driving by in the early morning and maybe in a bag that's rolled up, you take out the paper, you unroll it, and now you have a quarter of the paper, right? And so that quarter that you see of that paper, that is the part that's above the folded piece. And as soon as you unfold, you now have half of that paper. And when you open up the first page, you now have a full spread, the full newspaper, right? What we want is that quarter, that top quarter, upper left corner quarter of that paper, that top page above the fold. That's where all the more important information should go. Because really, that's what the users are going to see first. Okay? As soon as they have to scroll, that's below the fold. And that's how we know the difference. Okay? So it could be different on everybody's screen, right? Somebody with a smaller screen perhaps gets less. Someone with a larger screen perhaps gets more. So it's a matter of deciding what's going to be, up at the top. Adequate white space or blank space. White space is simply a term, which means that there's adequate space between elements, so it doesn't look cluttered, right? And then, of course, using an interesting page layout that provides some level of visual stimulation, right, to the user. I'm going to provide you with a couple samples, and we're going to go from very basic to something that gives maybe a little bit more, right, or a little better layout. So here is what we currently use in our case study, right, for our layout. It's very basic. The header's on top, navigation, then comes the content, and then the footer. It's usable, but not very exciting to us, right? The next level might be something that's a little bit better. We still have our 4 areas, right? Header, nav, content, and footer. However, the content area has now been broken up into multiple columns and then includes a graphic. A bit more interesting than the first one. Okay? And then the best choice would be something like this. We have 2 options or 2 samples for that. Where, again, we're still using those 4 areas, header, navigation, content, and footer. However, in this particular example on the left, you're getting multiple graphics at different sizes, right? And those 3 columns. So this becomes even more interesting than the previous one. And then here, our layout changes a little bit. Instead of our navigation going across the top like the one on the left, our navigation is now on the left-hand side. We still have the 4 areas, header, navigation, content, and footer at the bottom. The 4 areas are still the same. We simply decide to put them and arrange them differently using CSS, of course. And this definitely is a little bit more interesting, right, than the first 2. Any questions? You also, I believe, now see a lot of sites, many sites that are doing a couple things. One, they might have 3 columns, or they might have no columns, right? Where they're having graphics across the screen, and as you scroll down, they're having chunks horizontally as opposed to chunks vertically, right? So you're seeing a lot of this kind of new, current kind of website development there. All right. So let's talk a little bit about responsive web design. We should always now consider responsiveness when we develop web pages. And I want to remind you that it is not required of your project site to be responsive. Okay? I cannot expect a Web 150 introductory web development course to integrate responsive design in the project. So it is not required. However, if you'd like to try your hand at making your site responsive, you're welcome to do so. My only recommendation is that you complete your project first. And what do I mean by complete? Complete it as if you were going to hand it in and you were done. If you have extra time, then, right, make a copy of it and then try to include the responsiveness. Because if you don't get it to work, no loss. You still have your project ready to go that you can submit at any time before or on the due date. Right? So that's my recommendation. Okay? But I guarantee you'll have your hands full in this class creating the case study and your site to have to worry about the responsive design. So most students do not integrate the responsiveness, only because there's just a lot to do and there's just not enough time to do it. Okay? So what we do with, or what we consider with responsive design is that we think about the user and what device they might be on to view the page. And we want to alter the way the website looks and what displays based on that device or screen size, right? Whether it's a desktop, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a phone, right? And so we put this kind of coding in, and the browser will do the rest for us based on the device they're using. Okay? Now, the question is, well, how do I know what my page should look like on a phone? You don't right now. You're going to have to do some research to figure it out. What's going to be the best material, content to be there? I guarantee your desktop version is not going to look anything like your mobile version The content will be the same, but the layout will not be the same. So what I've done is I've provided, and I think it's also in the full-blown authors slideshow, these links. So I want to show you them now. This is a really good example of responsive web design. Okay, now give me one moment to restore the browser window so I can manually resize it, because if I do it now, you're not going to be as surprised as we do it manually. So give me a moment to blank the screen, and I can prepare to show you responsiveness on this particular website. Okay, great. So the page looks exactly like it did before. What I simply did was I stretched it to the width of my screen. So I want you to look at this page, and I want you to take in everything that the page currently shows you above the fold. Notice the MailChimp, right? Small pop-up there. Notice the graphic. Notice this information that we have here. Notice the navigation that we have, right? Note the graphic is a team that is across, right, the entire screen. As my users, right, come to this page using a different browser size, anybody notice what just happened? That's right. Now the graphic of that team no longer is one long line across. It's two, right, rows of players, which means that the browser window is just a little bit smaller and perhaps can't take the file, that graphic of the whole team in one row in its entirety. So the graphic actually changes, which is fantastic. Now let's keep on watching and find the next thing that changes based on the size of the browser. Oh, anybody notice that? MailChimp now has gotten a little bit smaller, again, based on the browser size. Let's keep on going. All right? So all of a sudden, our graphic is no longer 2 rows, but 3 rows because of, again, the browser window is getting smaller, which is our device is getting smaller. Hold on, let's keep on going. We're not done yet. As we get smaller, the graphic now gets smaller, right? Keep on going, and then let's see what happens next. What happens next? Something else happens. Anybody notice that? 2 things just happened. That's actually 3 things happened. You got it. The issue no longer is this circle. The MailChimp is now part of the nav, right? That little graphic. And then here, the navigation is now a menu. It's no longer set across the top. But wait, we're still not done. Oh yeah, there's more. Whammo, right? So as soon as the browser hits more of a phone size, right, a smaller size, you now get a completely different graphic, which now, of course, can only fit, right, with these 2 columns. Great, I think, example of responsive web design. Okay. Yeah, and that was, I think, just a design choice that they wanted. Yeah. Now, if you have not gone to this website called A List Apart, I recommend that you do and you sign up for their newsletters, because this site, it's all about web development, okay? And this is a great website for a lot of articles that are current, and they're really, really good and written very well, okay? One of the premier sites to go to for website content, right, or website information, okay? All right, I do want to show you another website. So the question still is, and still remains, well, how do I know, or how should I build my responsive site, right? What should it look like in the different devices? Well, of course, you're going to have to decide for yourself, but here are some, let me get to that site, media query, okay. Here are some samples, and let me get to that site here. So here's here's a website that I think you might find useful for you. And what it does is provide you a sample of a website, and there are tons of websites here. If I scroll down, there's a link list at the bottom. As you can see, there's like 50 pages of this stuff. Okay, so these are all websites, and how they've decided to create the responsive. That is what it should look like when, right, the responsiveness starts to unfold in the different screen sizes, right, or device sizes. So desktop, right, perhaps maybe a laptop or some other smaller device. Maybe this is the tablet and this is your phone, right? So as you can see, we got a much larger 3-column layout, right, large graphic. Now the graphic's a little bit smaller. The navigation isn't across the top. We still have 3 columns, but not as wide. And then, of course, this is only going to be a 1-column design. Your phone is going to be a 1-column design. Okay? It can't fit any more than that. It's going to be 1 column. So look at this one at the top, right? We got the graphic, bless you. We got the graphic. We got underneath that graphic and that little kind of pop-up or menu that they have. You have those red boxes and the graphic within those red boxes. We now go to a smaller format. The red boxes are a little bit smaller and the graphics are smaller. You get less of a graphic in the background, so they actually cut it off on the left-hand side. And now in this third version here, going from right to left, we have a much smaller graphic. Right, it's getting cut off a lot more than the one previous. No longer do we have the red boxes with the graphics in it. They've removed that. And then if we move over to our single column or our phone version, right, or smartphone version, you can see they've removed a lot of that stuff, just only the essentials. Okay. So here's another website that you might find useful for considering layouts when you create responsive design. Now, just as a heads up, in the wireframe milestone of your project, you will be required to create 2 wireframes, one for your home page on the desktop and one for the home page of a phone, right? A mobile device, namely a smartphone. Okay? So you'll have to create 2 wireframes for me in one of the milestones. I'm not asking you to create a responsive design web project. I'm simply asking you to consider and think about what it would look like if you had to, right? What would be the layout, right? The wireframe. Great. So just a little heads up on what you'll be doing in one of the milestones. All right. Let's continue on. And then, of course, the last thing I think that's in that chapter talks about the best practices is what you'll be doing in your group evaluation. And that is a series of 8 categories that contains a list of best practices, which means that if you are hired to redesign a website, this is going to be a great tool that you can keep in your pocket, pull out and say, okay, let's currently see what this website is doing now based on best practices, and then how we can improve that, right? If you're building it from scratch, well, now you know you're going to want to include a lot of these best practices in your website. Does that make sense? All right. Well, you'll have more time to look at these specific categories when you're going through the evaluation. Any questions? And that's it for the chapter overview. We covered a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff in this particular chapter about web design, right, in general.